Charlie Craven with Fly Fisherman Magazine, and this month I'm going to tie my own pattern, the Lucky Bee. It's one of the patterns I've been most excited about in a long time, and it's in the October-November edition of the magazine. Check it out there, and we'll sit down and tie one right now. Okay, this next one we're going to tie is sort of a fun one. This is a pattern I've been working on for, honestly, 20 years before I finally came up with something I liked. And this one is called a Lucky Bee, and it's a dry pattern for a yellow jacket. You know, we've all been out fishing and you've seen yellow jackets around, and you know, for years and years, back when I guided in Cheeseman Canyon, I would stomach pump a fish every day, and you know, every day those fish always had at least one yellow jacket in them, which, you know, always sort of piqued my interest that they ate yellow jackets. And I've always wanted to have a pattern that I could use to imitate that, sort of an extra terrestrial, as it were. And this is finally the pattern that I've come up with, and I'm pretty happy with it. It's kind of a fun one. So this one in the yellow jacket pattern is called a Lucky Bee, and he's got a corollary and tied in all black for a mud dauber, and this guy is called Jeffrey Dauber. Yep, I thank my friend Danny Lane for that one. Jeffrey Dauber is the name of that one. Couldn't pass that up. So I'm going to show you how to tie these. And I'm going to start off by putting a needle in my vise. This is just a regular sewing needle. Nothing special there. I'll back him up just a little bit here. Just a regular sewing needle. And I'm going to take some 8/0 yellow thread and start it on the needle, just as you would on a hook. I'm going to make a nice even thread base back about, I think that's about 10 millimeters, I think is what I measured, so about a centimeter long. And I'm going to leave that tag end hanging out the back here. And then I'm going to come in with a piece of, this is McFlylon, but it doesn't have to be. It could be the material we're going to use for the wing, which is macrame yarn. You know, any type of yarn, honestly, will work here, and it doesn't have to be any particular color. It'll barely show, but I like to use yellow so it matches up with the body. But I'm going to take about a half a strand of this, and I'm going to bring my thread back to the front here, and I'm going to tie this yarn down to the needle right up to the end of that thread base. I just want to anchor it tightly in place, and what that's going to do is give us sort of a core to make this body work off of. So I'll cut both ends off and kind of wrap over that, and then I'm going to come in with a piece of 3mm foam. So that is 3 millimeters wide in yellow, and I've cut it about 1 millimeter thick, so it's just a thin little slice. And what I'm going to do here, I'm going to square the end up. I'm going to lay this in at the front, catch it with my thread. I'm going to wrap back over it to the end of that thread underbody, or that thread base. So I've just got that tied in place. Now this body is not my invention. This is actually something Shane Stalkup came up with years ago, and he used it on hopper and stonefly patterns. And it was sort of brought to my attention again by another friend of mine from Idaho, Daniel Smith. And he uses this for his Hegan ant pattern, which is a cool little pattern that's got sort of an extended body. But I got to thinking about it and came up with a way to make this into a nice extended body for a bee or a wasp. I'm going to take a piece of, I think this is 02X, let me check here, 01X, which is 12 thousandths mono. Just a piece of fairly heavy, stiff mono. You know, probably 0X would work fine too. I'm going to tie that in right at the end and wrap back over it and then come forward again. Then I'm going to take this tag end and fold it back and anchor it down over that fold. Then I'll come in and cut that extra piece off. Having tied a bunch of these, that loop, looping that mono in there, sort of anchors everything down a little bit better, and I've got about an inch of mono sticking out the front here. So now I'm going to come in with just a little bit of super glue, and I want a pretty thin coat here, which is easier said than done, but I want to get all the way around that thread base. And get it evenly distributed on there. And honestly, I find it easier to kind of put it on, and then I'll use a scrap of foam to sort of smear it around and wipe off the extra. And then I'll set that carefully over there so I don't stick it to my arm later, which will probably happen anyway. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this thin strip of foam, I'm going to begin to wrap it. And I'm going to overlap the wraps pretty tightly together, right up to the end here. And there's always a little extra glue that kind of gets squeegeed out there, so I'm going to wipe that off. Then I'll come up and tie that off right on top with my thread, and then come in and cut that foam as close as I can. Right after you do that, wipe your scissor blades off because you probably got some super glue on them and you don't want to glue them closed. And then I'll come in and whip finish right over the end, and I just do a hand whip finish because I've got that mono sticking out. I'm not too worried about it coming apart because it's right over that wet glue. And I'll trim that thread out. Now, without hesitating, I'm going to back this up just a bit so you can kind of follow what I'm doing here. Without hesitating, I'm going to grab this body and kind of give it a little twist and pull it off of the needle, like so. You can see we've got our tag end of the thread hanging out the back. I'm going to grab that and pull all that extra out, and it'll start to bind up. That way we're locked down, and I'll pull that and trim that off close. The other thing I do is kind of take this and give it a bend, just to arc that body a little bit. You can see I'm just pushing the ends together to arc that body sort of into a wasp shape. So there's our extended body, and I'll set that aside for a second. Take my needle out of my vise, and typically I'll sit down and do all the bodies first and then come back and do the rest. Bring us down up just a bit here. And now I'm going to come in with some Simperfly 18-aught 30 denier GSP thread. And this is yellow. I'll show you here. And I'm going to start this on a Tiemco 2487 size 16. I'm going to start this just up here behind the eye. And I'll make a thread base just about back to the hook point. This GSP thread is very small, which is one of the reasons I use it here. I've got a fair amount of thread work that I want to do on this fly, and I don't want to build up bulk. But one of the liabilities of GSP thread is it's pretty slippery, so I want to make sure that I get a good solid thread base there. And then I'm going to come in with my extended body and tie that mono down right on top of the hook, like so. And I want a little gap in between the tie down and the body. That's going to represent that skinny little waist that a yellow jacket's got. So I want to anchor that down good and tight. And then again, to that same end, I'm going to back my thread up to about midpoint on the hook, and I'll fold that mono back and loop it around. That's just going to keep it from coming out. And then I'll trim that end off and anchor that down in place. So now I'm going to come in with some barred Sexy Floss legs. These are yellow barred. And I'm going to take and catch this strand up here at the front and pull one strand along the far side and wrap back over it right up to the base of that mono. So he kind of hangs out there on the far side. And then I'll pull this other end back and do the same on my near side. And I just kind of want those along the sides. I'm not too worried about their length. I want them to be at least the length of the body. I'll probably trim them off even longer yet, but we'll just get them out of our way. Maybe half again the length of the body, dangling out the back there. And then I'm going to come in and put just another little shot of super glue down on the hook shank. Just a little dab, it doesn't take much. Again, very easy to overdo. And then I'm going to take another piece of foam that's about 3 millimeters by about 2 millimeters, so slightly thicker. And I'm going to tie this down up here just in front of the eye. And wrap back over it. Got a random strand in there. Right up to the base of those legs. And then I'll just anchor it in place. And again, that dot of super glue is just to lock everything in. So now I'm going to come in with a little bit of black superfine dubbing. I'm going to build a ball for the thorax. Now I have tied these with amber superfine also for a yellow belly on them, but as I looked closer at the yellow jackets that I just killed in my yard, they are black on the bottom. So I'd fished the yellow one a fair bit, so it doesn't seem that the fish care, but black I guess is more accurate. So I'm going to tie this, or twist this down into a nice thin little strand, and right at the base of this foam strip I'm going to build a little ball here. You don't want to creep too far forward, but I want to build a pretty round ball. Tighten that last little bit up a bit. And end with my thread just in front. And you can see I've just made a little bucket there. And so now for the wings, by now you know I've become a big fan of this macrame yarn. And this is mixed colors. This is rust, gold, brown, and gray. And sort of matches that rusty yellow color that I see on yellow jackets. And I'm going to grab a fairly thin strand. Doesn't take near as much as you think to do what we're going to do here. So I've got a mixed colored strand here. And I'm going to just cut the ends off here so they're square. I'm going to take this and fold it over. I put my scissors in the middle of it so it's folded into a loop. And then right in that loop I'm going to take and roll that in my fingertips to kind of bring it to a point, like so. I've got just maybe a little bit more than I want here, so I'm going to thin this out just a bit. And I'll do that again. And if you pinch tight as you roll this, you can get a nice little pointed shape here. And I'm going to take this wing, I'm going to measure it. Oh, it's, 3/4 the length of the fly now. I'm going to lay it in against the far side, sort of angled across the hook. And this is where this GSP thread comes in nice, so I can really get that anchored down tightly without a lot of turns. Trim that butt end out. And then I'll take the rest of the strand and do the same thing again for the other wing. Roll that up tight. Lay that into the same length. Catch it with a few turns. I might even spin this thread up. This thread's very fine, but if you spin that thread up, it'll really bite in there well. So I've got my two wings sort of spread out on top there. And I'll trim that butt end out. Now I'm going to take one more strand of the sexy floss. And again, this is the small size. I'm going to cut it in half. I'm going to take one strand on my near side, and right at the base of the wing I'm going to catch it just with a couple turns of thread and kind of square them up on the hook there, like so. I'll do the same thing on the far side. And with this small strong thread you can really get those legs to splay nicely. And I'll come in and add just a tiny little drop of super glue just to the base of that tie down base of the wing there. And again, that's just to lock everything in so that it doesn't pull out later. And while that soaks in a bit, I'm going to take another small bit of black superfine, and I'm going to put this on my thread very thin, about as thin as I can get it. Maybe it wasn't as thin as I could get it, but that's pretty darn thin. And I'm just going to wrap right between the legs, right over that wet glue. And then I'll come up and I can cross between the legs. I'm really just trying to absorb that extra glue, and then I'll take a couple turns in front and end right up behind the hook. I want to make a little thread base there. Now I'm going to come in and pull the foam up between the wings, and I'm not really going to stretch it much here. I'm going to pull it over, bring my thread up and tie it down right behind the eye. Catch it with 4 or 5 turns. And then to create the head, I'm going to take this piece of foam and fold it back over itself. Kind of sweep these legs back. And just make a little loop there. And I'll come in with my whip finisher. And I'll whip finish right in that crease. And trim my thread out. Now this piece here on top, I'm going to pull up fairly tight, give it a little stretch, and trim it off flush so it buries down in there. You can kind of see our general profile now. Pull those wings up a bit. Remember, there's a little bit of glue on their base. So as we pull up on them, we can sort of form where they fit. And I want to stand them just a little bit more upright, like so. And then we can come in and start to do our coloring. And for the coloring, I'm going to use a black Copic marker. And I've got to turn this toward me a bit here, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by making black stripes down the near side of the body, and then I'll continue that same stripe down on the far side of the body. And the reason I use the Copic marker rather than a Sharpie is the tip is so fine on these Copics, I can really get in there and feel like I could do a nice job on it. So I've got those black bars. And then on top, right down the center, I'm going to draw a little triangle off of each of those bars. And yes, I did do some research on coloring or the markings on a yellow jacket. And that research included both internet and going out in the yard. We've got yellow jackets all over the place out here, so going out in the yard and taking a look. So what I'm doing now is I'm just going to put a spot in between each of those bars on that near side and on this far side, just by touching the tip of the marker to it. So just little spots there. So you can see that really kind of brings it to life. And now I'm going to draw a line down each side of the thorax section with one thin one down the center, about like so. You know, this is sort of where your artistic ability can come into play if you like. I'm just going to model that up a bit. You know, while we associate yellow with these critters, they're you know, probably as much black as they are yellow, which explains why the mud dauber works as well as it does. And then I'm going to come in on the sides of that head and just draw in a little eyeball on each side. And sort of the bottom of that face, I'm going to make a little chevron like so, which looks pretty yellow jacket-like. That's that little rat face that they give you right before they sting you. And our coloration is done. So now I'm going to come in and I'm going to trim these legs. The back legs we've already trimmed just a little longer than the body. The front legs are, I'm sorry, the middle legs are going to be just a little longer than the wings. And the front legs about that same length. And looks like I've got my leg tangled up in my wing there. Pull those wings up and give them another little twist just to sort of group them together. And that is the Lucky Bee. Pretty darn realistic and simple to tie imitation of a yellow jacket. You know, and I know most people, every time I've shown this slide to somebody, they're like, do trout eat yellow jackets? They do. You know, I've known it for years. I just haven't had a way to feed them. This last year I fished out in Idaho on the Teton River, and my wife and I went with Danny Lane, a good friend of ours, and we had a great day. And the fly of the day was the yellow jacket and the mud dauber, which surprised all of us. But you know, 100% confidence on the eats on those. You know, you can tell fish don't see a lot of them, but this is a cool little pattern, kind of fun to tie, fun to fish, and I really feel like I'm pulling one over on him when I make him eat the yellow jacket, because it's just totally unexpected. So there's my offering. The mud dauber is you know, tied the same way, just with black foam. Everything else is the same, but black foam there, and obviously you can mix and match colors to whatever you like. But pretty cool little pattern. I'm happy with this. This one makes me happy. There's the Lucky Bee. I hope you enjoy it.